Welcome to Underdog Rising with your host, Poezyn, where we ignite your journey from humble beginnings to greatness through inspiring tales of top executives and entrepreneurs. In this episode of Underdog Rising, we are joined by Karen Worthy, a career transition expert and founder of Worthy Career Paths. With a background spanning engineering, operations, and human resources, Karen now helps professionals navigate career changes and build paths they love. She brings a wealth of knowledge in areas like interview prep, salary negotiation, and personal branding to empower others on their journey to career success. Karen, thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Super excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Please just take a moment to walk us through a summary of your career from where you started to where you are today.
Happy to do so. And I'll give you the shorter version. I started my undergraduate career as a mechanical engineer at University of Texas in Austin. Was one of the very few female engineering students there at the time. And then as I kept working in engineering early on in my career, was very much one of the very few female engineers at the company that I was at and just in general. When I graduated, it's gotten a lot better these days. But I think when I graduated, we were 8% female in my mechanical engineering graduating class.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it was definitely something that I just kind of did it and I worked through it. And I joined communities where communities are like essential for getting through things that are tough, whether it's a job search or whether it's being one of only 8% females within a mechanical engineering degree. I joined the Society of Women Engineers, and it really shaped my undergraduate experience and made a huge difference. Um, Early on in my career, I worked at really large companies. So I worked at places like Procter and Gamble, worked at Amazon, ended up running some fulfillment centers for them. Absolutely had a blast, learned a ton, and then transitioned into the startup space and really had a lot of really good experiences there as well. When I was there, up until that point, I had been doing, I started as a mechanical engineer. I transitioned over into operations, which was my first love, probably will always be my largest love is the operations world. And then eventually worked my way into supply chain, into fulfillment with Amazon. And then when I was at the startup company, they had a big need in recruiting. And so I went over there as a temporary assignment. Have a habit of saying yes to crazy, scary things and things that are a little bit outside of my comfort zone. And that has served me really well in my career, honestly. Um, at the startup, I ended up moving into recruiting, ended up staying there, liking it, really diving into recruiting, HR, talent acquisition, became their vice president of HR before I left. And then a couple of years back, left for a sabbatical and decided to start my own company, helping job seekers to find their next role. And it's been an amazing journey, a roller coaster, and so much fun.
You went through so many moments that so many people nowadays face, right? And you were able to help coach them and guide them through everything that you've been through. Also, like you stated, right, within industries where there was only 8% that were actually female, like that's astonishing as well, right? And if you don't mind, one of the questions I'd like to ask based off of that is, you know, are there any sort of tips or tricks or advice that you might have for females going into the workforce today that might be sort of in a minority group like that?
Yeah, if you're in a minority group, don't like I don't know if I am the right example for this. But what I would say did help me is find people that can be your support system. So for me, it was a group of women engineers when I was in undergrad. Even when I went and worked at Procter and Gamble, there was a women's group there that really helped me and supported me. But don't the other thing that I did is there were not a lot of mentors or bosses that looked like me or were like me. And so I didn't have the option to be picky and be like, I need a woman boss or a woman mentor to look up to. I really tried to learn from everybody, and that has paid a lot of dividends as well.
I like that tactic though, you know, because even in this day and age of social media, I think it gives everybody a leg up in that sense, right? Where you can reach out to people on social media, wherever they might live, even across, you know, different continents and just connect with them to speak. And I think people always want to help out. People always would like to give back. So, you know, just recommend to listeners today, like, don't be nervous, you know, don't be afraid, reach out, try and engage with people. And yeah, you know, if you can reciprocate the value, that's always amazing as well. But people are always willing to to help out. And that kind of touches on confidence a little. I think in this day and age, it kind of gets pulled apart a little bit. So, from your perspective, how important is confidence in navigating career transitions, even, right? And like, what steps do you suggest to build that confidence over time?
Yeah, as much as it might be hard to be confident when you're not, it is very helpful in the job search because if you are able to walk into if you're able to, even just from an application point of view, if you are more confident, you're going to apply for things that are a little bit more of a stretch, that are a little bit more of a fit. You won't second guess that. When you walk into the interview, you're going to feel like you belong there and you're going to do better in the interview because of that. And so you want to have strategies before you get to that stage to help build your confidence up a little bit. Sometimes this works with getting a community or a friend group or family surrounding you and supporting you. Sometimes it's doing practice reps with a coach beforehand so that you have that confidence going into the interview. Sometimes it's what we talked about earlier on in this conversation of go find the people who have already been there and done that and learn from them and have them be some of that, like be a mentor for you as you go through this.
And you just touched on practice reps, right? Like everybody will reference, oh, health and fitness and go and work out, right? Like you've got to put those reps in. But even in this situation, that's very unique. Would you mind sort of walking us through what practice it looks like from your point as you've helped so many people in your career?
Yeah, I mean, practice is so important. And I want to really stress it's practice with the right feedback mechanisms. So, if even we'll use the workout analogy here, but like if you're working out at home and you have nobody watching your form, you have nobody checking what you're doing, nobody helping to motivate you, it's very possible to injure yourself or not make the progress that you think you're making. Whereas if you work out with somebody who knows what they're doing, somebody who can help you, with a coach, with something, or even with the right equipment in a gym, like it's so much easier to make quicker progress. I can share a personal, like I went on a nutrition journey and I had been trying to do that for a long time by myself with books and with influencers that I was following and all of that kind of thing. And I really was stalling out, and I made the investment in myself to get a private coach for a fee for a very short amount of time, and I made more progress in that amount of time than I did in the entire years before then. And so having somebody to give you real life feedback and accountability makes a huge difference, even in the job search. If you are practicing interview questions by yourself, it's better than not practicing it. Please do it if you aren't doing it. But if you practice with somebody who can give you feedback right then, it's 100 times better.
Yeah, it's because there's a saying, right? We always fall to our lowest level of preparation. And if you haven't prepared at all, where do you think you're going to fall, right? Even if, to your point earlier, you're great at just ad libbing and speaking fluently, right? You're going to run into some level of complication and you'd rather have that raw feedback and speak to at least a live human being, if not yourself in the mirror, like you mentioned. But it sounds really exciting, like what you do and how you get to help people. Like there's kind of a great sense of energy that comes from it. Like, what's the most rewarding part of helping someone find clarity and direction in their career?
Honestly, it's having them find what they're supposed to be doing and having them land those roles. It's very different than what I did in the corporate world. In the corporate world, I was in charge of large projects. We made a lot of money for the company, but I feel like what I'm doing now, I have a much bigger impact on a fewer number of people, but those lives I have a much larger impact on, and I become friends with my clients. I become able to talk with them about more than just the job search, and it's so rewarding from that perspective.
I think that's so wonderful. Yeah, it might be fewer people, but it's almost the impact's even bigger in a sense, because you are ultimately changing people's lives. Sure, you go work for an organization, maybe it's a passion, they've always wanted to do it, or higher salary increase and their family lives change. So I think that's extremely important. And you've mentioned before, right, that it's not who you know, but it's who they know. Can you elaborate on that just for the younger generation and how can they apply it in their early careers?
Yeah, it's one of those interesting things that your network is a finite amount of people. Maybe you have a really good network and it's a large number of people. Maybe you have a small network and that's okay too. But whatever it is a finite amount of people. And usually those people will not be the ones that know of the jobs or the role openings for what you're looking for. You need to have a much wider network, even than your widest network. And so typically it's about the relationships that you have and how you can work those into relationships and referrals and introductions with the people that they know and take maybe it's a large network and make it an even larger network to help you find the right role for you.
Hmm. And how do you recommend people increasing their network, right? Is it just going out on LinkedIn and adding people randomly, or is there a strategy or process behind that?
Please no, don't do that. That is not what you wanna do. So typically I tell folks, depending on where they're at, everybody is a little bit unique. But typically I'll tell folks to strengthen the relationships you already have. So if you have a coworker that you haven't talked to in a couple of years, reach out and reconnect and say, "Hey, how's it going? I wanted to check in on you because was thinking about you and haven't talked to you lately." And at the end of that conversation, you're going to say something like, hopefully during the conversation, you've talked about your goals or what kind of job you want to get. At the end, you're going to be like, who do you recommend I talk with next? And they're going to recommend somebody and they might even introduce you to them. And you're just growing your network and you're connecting that way. The other thing that I highly recommend is figure out what your communities are that you want to be part of. I recommend being part of a professional organization. So if you are a project manager, be part of the project management organization. If you're in supply chain, be part of the supply chain organization. Whatever industry you're in or whatever profession you are doing, there's probably a professional organization associated with it. So go be part of that and then attend their events and meet people through that. Through those events, and those can be connections that you go reach out to. And then you can have a one on one conversation with them and build the relationship even deeper, and then you can ask them, who do they recommend you talk to? Like, it just kind of snowballs on itself.
Yeah, and it's just all about being engaging, you know, and having that conversation and it's staying top of mind too, right? Don't make it transactional in a sense. Actually build that relationship with people, learn from them because if they're willing to give back, you know, also maybe at times be thankful about it too. You know, I had this one guest on as well and they mentioned one thing they do because they love doing it is you know, once they go to a networking event and they meet certain individuals or they have a one-on-one appointment, at times they'll actually physically write a thank you note and then send it to the individual, right? Just to make even that impact even go even further, which is it's interesting. And then you know when we look at it, there's a lot of personal branding and storytelling on LinkedIn. People trying to stand out against the crowd. Like, what is the role of storytelling within personal branding, and how can like young professionals learn to tell their story effectively?
Storytelling is a very innate human function, and we respond very, very well to storytelling. So if you think about it like this, like if somebody were to tell you, here's I'll use the negotiation example. If I was to tell you half of the people don't negotiate, it's a fact. It's not a story. It's not going to be like intellectually you're grabbing onto that, but emotionally and at your core, you're probably not grabbing onto that. But if I was to tell you a story, so I'll tell you one of my stories. If I was to tell you that when I first graduated college, my career counselor, my parents, everybody said, take the offer that you're going to get. It's a really good offer. You don't negotiate because they don't negotiate for this company. And so I believed that. And I went through my first offer, my second offer. Nobody ever told me differently. And I never negotiated. And then about 20 years into my career, which makes me sound really old, but about 20 years into my career, I went in and said, maybe a little bit less. I went in and said, I don't remember where I was. I was part of one of the communities that I talk about joining, and I was at an event, and somebody was talking about how do you negotiate a salary, and a light bulb went off. Like I was like, I could do this. Maybe I should try doing this, and I tried it on my next interaction, my next job that I applied for, and I didn't ask for a whole lot, but I was shocked. They gave in, and they gave it to me without even any pushback. And so the next one, I asked for a little bit more, and over time I've gotten to the point where it becomes very natural and I know what's expected and I know it's not, and I'm able to coach people on it. But if I hadn't had somebody expose me to that, I would be part of that 50% that's still not doing that. So I know it's a little bit of a roundabout way, but that's the story that's gonna be more memorable. When you're personal branding, people connect with people. People connect with stories. And so they're not gonna remember this fact of 50% of people don't negotiate because it's not personal. But if they remember that Karen went through most of her career without negotiating and then a light bulb went off and started negotiating and it worked, that's a much more memorable story. And then if I talk about it a little bit more, share a little bit more details, it becomes even more memorable.
That is exceptional. I think people tend to lose sight of that, but it's something that is important. And then you touched again on, sort of salary negotiation, and that's something, to your point, not many people speak about. But what are the key elements of a successful salary negotiation? And are they simple things that people can do to maybe build that confidence to be able to have those conversations?
Yeah, so most people think negotiation, like if you think about bigger, broader negotiation, most people think about negotiation as only for big things. So it's for your salary, it's for your house when you buy it, it's for your car when you buy it. It's big, big, impactful financial decisions. And it's scary to start and do your first practice. We talk about practice. Don't make your first practice be something that's big and impactful and scary. And so I recommend before you even get to a salary negotiation, practice negotiating other things. Go to a flea market or a garage sale and practice negotiating the price for something. And if you get it, awesome. And if you don't, that's okay. It's a learning. And just get into this mode of like, how do I practice this before I get there? Practice with a coach when you are doing a salary negotiation. I have lots of mock salary negotiation interviews with my clients where we role play and we practice back and forth, and they get the words and they get to practice saying the words. And then sometimes I get to practice being the one that's like, no, I can't give you that salary increase. And they practice responding to that. And like, it's so much fun. But it makes it less scary and it makes it more comfortable.
Oh, that's really great because you touched on a point there, right? The rejection piece, and often at times you don't get to practice that until it slaps you in the face, right? And I think that's key because it's important to practice, and you doing this, I think, is very exceptional to help folks. But do you have any sort of advice on rejection, or maybe what people can do in the face of that?
Yeah, rejection is a very real part of the job search process, unfortunately. You're going to get rejected probably hundreds of times before you find that one offer. And so everybody deals with it differently. I have one client who takes all of the rejection emails from all the jobs that they apply to and puts it in the folder like "told you so," and basically is gonna like it's gonna be "I told you so" folder for when she gets her job, and she's gonna like feel better about it. Um, but there's a lot of different ways you can handle this. One of the best ways is to have that support system around you. Like have that confidence going in, know what you're going after, and only really apply for the ones that really make sense for you. I am one of the things that it sounds so counterintuitive, but one of the things that a lot of people will tell me when they first start talking with me is, Karen, I really need a job and I need it immediately. So I applied for roles that are a level or two below where I actually should be. But I'm getting rejected from them and now I don't know what to do. And usually what ends up happening is they're getting rejected because they're overqualified for them. And now it's feeding into their psyche and they're like questioning their qualification there. And it's just a very bad downward cycle. And so I want you to really focus in on what type of roles are you going to be good at? What are you positioned for? And just ignore everything else. The rejection is not worth it.
Wow, that's powerful. Thank you for sharing that because I think people focus on the rejection, when they should sort of just push it to the side and keep going because there's multiple different variables that can come into play. But it was fascinating that were touching on that story because you wouldn't think that would be the case, right? If somebody needed a job immediately. But, I think even what you were talking about, there's so many different variables that do come into play. You've got applicant tracking systems, et cetera. We can touch on that a little bit too. But, you know, you've posted about on LinkedIn as well that, recruiters skim their resume, right? And there's been two studies done on that, one in 2012 and one in 2018. Like, what recommendations do you have for college students and people getting into the workforce currently, or returning moms, et cetera, to prep their resumes for that?
Yeah, so and if somebody doesn't know, there's a thing called an applicant tracking system. It's a ATS for short. You might see it out there. So the applicant tracking system is just a database, and it's applicant tracking system or ATS, and all it is a database where when you submit your resume or your application, it stores it and it helps the recruiter sort it and filter it. So when somebody will say, I was rejected by the applicant tracking system or rejected by the ATS, all of that is really happening from the recruiter or something the recruiter pre-set up in the applicant tracking system. It's not a magic black box that's doing it on its own. It's not, most of them are not set up that way. When you are looking at your resume, though, so if you are a mom coming back into the workforce or a student entering the workforce for the first time, you want to be as standard in your resume format as possible. So there are some standard resume formats. If you just go look online, you can see what those are. But things that you look super creative are usually not good when it comes to a resume. You don't want to stand out because of your resume format. You want to stand out because of the content of your resume. And so when a recruiter is looking at resumes, they're usually looking at a lot of resumes very quickly. So they're have a tab usually open on their screen and they're flipping through them 5, 10 seconds at a time. If the things aren't in the right spots and the things aren't in the order that they're used to seeing them, it's going to take them longer to understand what they're seeing, longer to understand what it is you can offer, and they might be tempted to just continue flipping through the resumes. So you want to follow the standard format as much as possible.
And then for those listening today, is there a difference between specific file formats, right? Like whether it's a PDF or a Word document, et cetera?
I'm you can build it in whatever makes sense for you. I'm always a fan of submitting it as a PDF because it will, if you submit it as like a Google Doc or a Word doc or something like that, it's going to show up a little bit differently on everybody's screen. The formatting will get off. I highly recommend submit it as a PDF.
Oh, that's interesting. And then what do you think makes a resume or a LinkedIn profile like truly stand out to hiring managers?
If it is showcasing the things that they want to have this person do. So, for example, usually what happens before a recruiter will post a job description or a job posting is they will have a conversation with the hiring manager and say, "Hey, hiring manager, what do you actually care about in the person that I bring to you?" Hiring manager will say two or three things. The recruiter will then go into a usually pre existing job posting template, add those two or three things, and post it up, and then start looking at resumes. And so when you are reading a job description, you want to read through it and try and figure out, it's kind of like being a detective, try and figure out what are those two or three things that they had that conversation about? And then how do I make that really obvious on the top half of page one on my resume? So it could be a headline, it could be a career highlights section, it could be skill keywords, something like so if the hiring manager and the recruiter are saying this person needs to know Salesforce software and the top half of page one doesn't say anything about Salesforce, it's all the way buried on the bottom of page two, you're not going to get the call probably. And so you really need to make sure that it's speaking to what the recruiter and the hiring manager want to see.
That's incredible. And I know this is kind of changing things up a little bit, but you were talking earlier about communities, and I know that you are starting your own. So I'd love to touch a little bit on that, and maybe you can shed some light on it, and then we'll go into sort of where people can find you and connect with you, et cetera.
I am starting my own community. So we talked a little bit about earlier in the conversation about the impact, and I've been fortunate to be able to have a really strong impact on a handful of folks. It's a pretty large handful, but still a handful of folks. And in my dreams, as I'm going through the last couple of years, I've always had in the back of my mind I wanted to be able to have a bigger impact. I'd wanted to be able to. There's been a lot of people that have come to me and asked for help and asked for assistance that I just don't have the time or the bandwidth to help at that moment. And it always bothers me. And so I actually am launching it in like later this week. So depending on when this airs, it might be already launched at this point. But I am launching a community to help those folks that I've always wanted to help. The idea here is it's very accessible, it's very low cost, and it is open for folks who want to have help during their job search, but also before and after their job search. And so I'm running a beta right now. Depending when this launches in early 2025, it should be live and available for everybody. But it's going to be one of those things where you are able to come in and you're able to see resources. Like I have a resume course that's going to be included in there for free. I've got all sorts of like past topics around interview preparation, salary negotiation. We do a lot of like lunch and learns and workshops and that kind of stuff where you can ask questions. And then there's an interactive chat section of it and a lot of support from between the members as well. I'm super excited about this community. So if anyone's interested, go to my website, Worthy Career Paths, with an S at the end, and there will be something on there about the community, regardless of when you listen to this episode.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think, anybody listening to today, definitely go sign up, join that community. That's a lot of gold inside that community, right? And I think it's, oftentimes people go to different websites and they're searching and they're scouring the web for all this information. Why not go join a very solid community where not only yourself, well, right, with your lessons or courses or resources, but even other individuals, that they can jump in and chime in as well and give sort of little golden nuggets, right? So I appreciate you touching on that. And then just to kind of go back to the resume writing concepts of everything, AI, obviously, it's everybody's talking about it. It's here now, but a lot of people will mention, right? Go into ChatGPT, find a job description, right? Copy, paste, go through all those simple steps, make it align with the resume, and then, I mean, with the job description, and then apply, right? I think there's some inconsistencies there, but do you have any thoughts or feedback on how people should leverage or not leverage AI when potentially applying for roles?
So I think of AI as a tool, no different than any other tool that's come before it. The trick with AI is it's still relatively new, and so we need to be careful how we're using it. Please don't go into ChatGPT or Perplexity or whatever your AI tool of choice is and say, here's my existing resume, here's the job description, please rewrite it for me, and then just blindly submit it. Please do not do that. Instead, but I have seen people do that, so please do not do that. Please, please, please do not do that. But what I have seen work really, really well is being very focused and using it as a brainstorming partner. So, for example, if you have a job description that you're about to apply for, go in, paste the job description in, paste your resume in, and ask it a question like, what do you see that I'm missing in my resume that I should have? And how would like, where section should I put it in? And then you make the judgment call of how you put it in and whether or not it applies to you, and that it can be super helpful. Or even just pasting the job description and then asking it, what do you think the three things the hiring manager actually cares about here? And seeing what it comes back with and using it to help put that filter in.
Yeah. And then do you think people should go out and connect with hiring managers themselves if they're listed on the job posting?
If they're listed, yes, definitely. With the recruiters, with the hiring managers, and then if you know somebody else in the company, go have a conversation with them as well. It definitely will help you to have that internal referral within the system, or even if they're not willing to be a referral, it'll help you to have more information about the company and what's going on inside.
And is it beneficial for if somebody's reaching out to an individual that already works at an organization to do that ahead of time or do it while they're applying?
Oh, I get this question so often. It's such a great question. There are benefits to both ways. However, almost all of the benefit goes towards apply first and then do your networking afterwards because you want to be an early application as much as possible. There's always a risk that they could close the website, so they won't be taking any more applications, and you don't want to wait a day or two and then not have the ability to apply. There's also the earlier you apply, the more likely you are that the recruiter is going to see your resume just because they tend to look at a certain point, and then if they find enough resumes, they stop looking at that point in a lot of cases. So the earlier you apply, the better, and you can always network afterwards.
So then, with staying on that in that same vein, there often at times you can see, and this has happened for a while, but I'm sure it's even more rampant with AI. But folks will go on, right? Platforms like LinkedIn, it's the B2B platform, and then they look for a job, and then they want to apply, and then all of a sudden, there's over 100 applicants, right? Already within the first 30 minutes to an hour. Are there certain things for folks to do to stand out from that, or should they just apply and hope for the best? What's your advice on that?
If it's the right job for you, still go ahead and apply. There's a couple, and then to stand out, honestly, the referrals and the networking is how you stand out. Um, the other thing to know on that is the way that LinkedIn tracks how many applicants there are or how many people have applied is not super intuitive. So the number you see of like 300 people applied or whatever it is actually the number that clicked I want to apply or clicked the apply button in LinkedIn. It's not the number that actually finished and submitted the application. And there's a lot of times when people fall off throughout that process. So just because it says 300 people applied does not necessarily mean 300 people actually applied.
Man, thank you for sharing that, right? Because I think there's a lot of people out there that potentially get discouraged because they see that high number and they're like, oh, okay, I'm intimidated. I'm not going to go apply. But you should anyway and do all of the prior steps that you mentioned just to follow through because it's important and you never know, right? If you've done your research, followed all the tips that you've advised throughout this episode, you will most likely have a very successful rate of getting sort of that callback to do that interview, right? And when there are so many and people are looking to do various different interviews because they're not sure, obviously, which role they might receive, but do you have sort of a process or is there a process that people can leverage to track the roles that they're applying for?
Yep. There's a lot of different options out there for you. There you can go as complicated as a full-fledged database through something like Teal or like HubSpot. Most of the times I do not recommend that. It's more complicated than it needs to be. And so it figure out what works for you, but it does not have to be super complicated. I've seen people do this very successfully on a spreadsheet, like a Google Sheets or an Excel. I've also seen people do this very successfully, get a spiral notebook and just handwrite when I applied and where I applied to. It does not have to be super high tech. I personally am a little bit of a spreadsheet nerd, and so I love the spreadsheets and like definitely have some formats that can work. If anyone wants any of those, just reach out and LinkedIn message me. I'll send you one of those. But you want to, when you're tracking it, you want to track a couple basic things. So you want to track the date you applied. You want to track the job title, and then the job posting, everyone usually tracks the link to the job posting, which isn't a horrible thing to do, but you also need to either download it or copy and paste it or physically print it or something because it's going to, in a lot of cases, it's going to be pulled off the website before you go interview for it. And you don't want to be prepping for your interview and not have that accessible to you. So every time you apply, screenshot it, print it, something so that you have a physical or a offline copy of this that is not tied to that website link.
That is extremely smart. Because oftentimes you think it will always be there, but ultimately they don't need it up there anymore, so they'll put it down, right? Because they got a handful of candidates that they'll pull into that process. And then when we look at more of the career transitions that might occur in someone's life, right? Oftentimes there are transferable skills, whether you go from one industry to another, such as yourself. Do you have any advice on how people should represent those, or are there any key transferable skills that folks should work on earlier rather than later?
Oh, that's a great question. You always want to put the skills in the words or the nomenclature of the place that you're applying for. So, for example, let me think if I can think of a good one here. If I am, let's say I have an engineering background and I am going to an HR role, for example. As an engineer, I'm very process oriented, I'm very detail oriented, I'm fairly technical. I would take that and I would think about things that I have done from those in that role that are transferable over to the HR side. So on an HR side, sometimes it's very helpful to be process oriented, detailed, and technical, but there's a piece that's missing there that I wouldn't typically talk about from an engineering point of view around the people interactions, the relationship building, the overarching organizational awareness and strategy. And so I take those pieces that I usually wouldn't talk about in an engineering interview, and I talk about them a lot more in an HR resume or in a HR interview. And so it's the same things that I've been doing. I'm just highlighting different aspects of them.
That's fascinating. So it's almost like you have to be able to wordsmith things in a different way because it might not resonate specifically with what they're looking for due to the position, but the experience does. Whether you've used the platform, but maybe how you used it doesn't directly align, but you have the experience in order to fulfill that position.
Yeah. I mean, think of it like if you're trying to talk your boss into something at work, or you're a kid trying to talk your parents into something. Think you will automatically, hopefully, think about what matters to them, and you'll use that as the selling point. It's the same thing here. So, like, if my kid wants to stay up late, for example, he might say, instead of saying, Mom, can I stay up late tonight because I want to play more? He's going to say, Mom, can I stay up late tonight? I already did my chores. And he's going to like put his selling point in there. Or if I stay up a little bit later, I can do a little bit more reading with you, which he knows I like when he reads more. So, like, there's always think about your audience and put it in terms that your audience is gonna appreciate.
That is fascinating. Yeah, have a little bit of empathy there for a second, and think about how they're going to receive that information. That's amazing. Now, when we look at cover letters, right, there's this age old thing with cover letters. Do we need them? Do we not need them? Organizations ask for them at times. What are a few thoughts from your viewpoint on letters? Should people do them? Do they have to spend hours on them? What does that look like?
Please don't spend hours on your cover letters. I'll start with that one. So cover letters are, unfortunately, I think, a necessary evil in some cases. If the application asks for a cover letter, yes, you should submit a cover letter. Even if your cover letter is very generic, I'll talk about that in a minute. But there are some applicant tracking systems out there that rank like, let's say 1,000 people apply, the recruiter is going to get a ranked list of who the applicant tracking system thinks is best, and they're going to look at those resumes first. If your application is quote unquote more complete, which means it has all the pieces, including the cover letter, it will tend to get ranked higher in some systems. Some systems don't work that way, some do. You don't know when you're applying which one it is. And so if it has a spot to put a cover letter, put a cover letter. However, odds are nobody is ever going to actually open and read the cover letter. That doesn't mean you shouldn't put one in there. It doesn't mean it shouldn't have real information in it, accurate information. But a typical cover letter, um, maybe it takes you half an hour to an hour to build a template the first time. And then every time you apply, if you're doing the niche down, I'm only applying for these types of roles, it should be a very similar cover letter each and every time where you're only changing the name of the company, the name of the role, and maybe one or two words. Everything else can be the same and it should take you 10, 15 minutes or less.
I think so many people get caught up in the logistics of it and creating and rewriting a brand new one. And it's like, okay, where does it stand? I think a lot of it can transfer to multiple different organizations, depending if you're swapping, industries or verticals. But you wanted to touch on sort of if your cover letter is a little bit generic.
Yeah, work on working smarter, not harder. So like use start with a generic cover letter but it's generic to the roles. So if I am applying to be an account manager at a particular type of company, I'm probably applying to other similar roles very similar to that. The cover letter is just like the resume is going to be very similar. It's not going to be dramatically different for each of those. So make sure you are using what you already have.
And then another big item that always comes up is how long do I wait? Right, the timeline. Do I need to engage with the hiring manager to get an update, or sort of? I know there's often at times there's automated emails nowadays, but do you have any perspective, or are you able to shed any light on how long people should wait for a response?
When you first apply, don't wait before you start networking. Go ahead and reach out to three people, usually a recruiter, a hiring manager, and one person you know at the company. Once you're already in some kind of conversation or some kind of back and forth. So let's say you had your first interview, the recruiter said, well, we'll get back to you, and then it's been a little while and you haven't heard anything. That's the one I get a lot is like, should I reach out? Should I not reach out? Rule of thumb is to reach out when you think it's usually longer than you think. And so when you're in the interview, ask them what their timeline is, and they might tell you right then. If you haven't heard from me by next Wednesday, reach out. And now you know, and you just mark it on your calendar and you've got that. If they don't share that, I usually do rule of thumb of like 8 calendar days. It lets you give them enough time to reach out to you if you want, but it's long enough that you don't seem impatient or rude as you're going through the process.
Yeah, and that's a very fine line. You don't want to tick them off in any sense. You want to be able to respect them, but also have a response. And then there's also the conversation right around getting feedback after an interview. What are some ways that people can reach out and ask for information? Should they be offended if they do not get a response from people about feedback once they've, been asked to go into an interview and then they have that conversation?
There's a lot of expectation of feedback with job seekers right now, but I don't think it's a realistic expectation, to be totally honest. Um, I totally expect, and job seekers should expect to hear, did I proceed or did I not? They should, like, especially if you have gone through an interview and you've actually talked to a real life human being, you should and really need to get something back that says, I'm sorry, you're no longer in the process anymore, or thank you for applying, but no, thank you. That type of feedback, that letter of rejection is helpful and is very much expected. The detailed feedback of, we didn't choose you because you didn't have enough of this skill or because you weren't good enough at this thing, is not a reasonable expectation. There's a lot of companies, there's a lot of HR departments that very specifically tell their employees do not give that type of feedback because it opens you up for lawsuits and all sorts of other types of claims. And so expecting that feedback is pretty unrealistic right now. Sometimes you'll get it anyway, but it's not realistic.
Yeah, and I don't think people should be offended by not receiving it, right? Just take it with a grain of salt, and move on to the next one. And then in this day and age, there's a lot of organizations, obviously, that have shifted to remote. We're doing remote during COVID. Now there's hybrid roles, et cetera. Are there any specific skills that people should learn? Because there's, sometimes people are just used to working in an office. And then if they go to apply for a role that's remote and now they got to transition, it might be a little bit of a challenge. Do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, remote is more difficult when it comes to building relationships. You have to be more intentional about it. It's harder to just stop by somebody's office or grab a bite to eat with them or whatever it is. And so, if you are in a remote situation, I would highly encourage you be very proactive about adding chit chat at the beginning of your meetings. Be very proactive about scheduling one-on-ones with people. Be very proactive. Usually, when companies have remote working situations, they usually have some kind of like a Slack or a Teams or something where you can chat with each other online. Be proactive about just hanging like and shooting like um, general comments like "Good morning," "How was your weekend?" things like that into the chat to help it feel more like an office environment. I also highly recommend try to be part of in-person things, even if it's just like a once a quarter retreat or something like that.
That's interesting. I do believe in that too. You can't just sit in your a room in your house all day long and not engage with people. You need to add that to your repertoire. And I like the element of going to a retreat or a networking event that's in your vicinity in order to engage with people. Where can people go to engage with you? I know you mentioned your website. Obviously, you have LinkedIn, but are there any other places where people can engage?
That was a great question. Honestly, those two are the best. So my website is Worthy Career Paths with an S at the end. And so you can go there. That has all of my resources. It has some free downloads for folks as well as information about my community. So if you are job searching, I'd recommend check it out. At least grab the free stuff, if nothing else. I am very active on LinkedIn, and that is the easiest way for folks to reach me. Is you can message me on LinkedIn and just say hi, say I heard you on the podcast. I will connect with you, all of that kind of stuff. If somebody wants to email me, that is another way. It's Karen, so it's my first name, Karen, at worthycareerpaths.com is the email. So if anyone can email me there as well if they want.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that information because this is absolutely incredible. You've been such a wonderful resource for sharing all your knowledge, right? I mean, you charge people for this, but rightfully so, right? Because it helps them get to where they want to go. And it is an investment in their future, right? And I think people look at that differently when they're like, now I got to pay somebody to help me. But yes, they have years and years of experience to help you get there faster, right? So Karen, I really appreciate you spending your time with us today and sharing your knowledge.
I'm excited for it as well. This has been a blast. It really helps me in my mission to help more people. And so I'm really appreciative of you having me on the podcast.